I know, the iPad lineup was refreshed fairly recently, so this is talking deep into the future, but really, I'm okay with anything that gets us to stop talking about the iPhone X or the 2018 iPhone, so let's talk about the iPad. In 2017, Apple has finally switched around the declining sales of the iPad. Sales were dropping for many years, but for the first time, we've actually seen year-over-year growth, both with the 2017 iPad being extremely affordable and a lot of people really enjoying this year's new two iPad Pros with the ProMotion display, the thinner bezels on the 10.5-inch, and the insane processing power with the A10X chip. But I think the biggest thing that is getting people excited about iPads again is iOS 11. There's so many more multitasking options with the dock getting bigger. You can now run 3 apps at once and do picture-in-picture, and the processing power and RAM is all there to support that. So I think it's really important that Apple strikes while the iron is hot and make an iPad next year in 2018 that can get people excited again. And for those of you who have not updated to any iPad, whether it be the cheaper one or the Pros, this year they could really get people excited for it again and continue this growth with the tablet lineup. And as we've just seen the release of the iPhone X, how can the hardware we're seeing released in the new iPhone lineup affect the hardware in the iPad lineup? I think some of the changes that the iPhone lineup is going through can be even more substantial and even more recognizable in the iPad lineup. So first off, we're already getting some leaks and rumors that Apple is working on Face ID on other devices. We know they want to implement Face ID on all 3 iPhones released next year, but also on the next generation iPad, which I think is going to be far more doable for several reasons. First of all, I don't think Apple necessarily wants the notch. I don't think they're going to add the notch on the iPad or add the notch on the MacBook or anything stupid like that. If Apple had the option to remove the notch on the iPhone, I think they would. It's not some kind of iconic thing that's meant to encompass the iPhone or anything. And I think the fact that the iPad is much larger means that storing Face ID in it will not be as difficult because you're not working with very little space and very limited size and weight. With an iPad, there's more wiggle room, as well as the fact that an iPad really needs to have some form of side bezel for it to be comfortable. You need to be able to hold it. There needs to be something there your fingers can rest on, unlike an iPhone, whereas removing bezels can be as cool as you want. You can remove as much bezel on a smartphone as you want because it'll just look cooler and cooler to hold in the single hand and tap with the other. An iPad you use very different. Most of the time you're using it with 2 hands and you're reaching in the middle with thumbs, or you're resting it or tapping away this way. So I think that Apple will not give the same bezel removing treatment to the iPad lineup as the iPhone X. What I think they could do is, since they've established that on the 10.5-inch iPad they're okay with bezels being thinner but still present, they could mimic a part of what the iPhone X did and have the same size bezel all the way around the iPad. Forgive me for my crappy conceptual artist skills, but this is what I threw together in Photoshop. No, it's not perfect. Don't expect perfection because I don't do this professionally, but this just gives you a rough idea of what I mean. With the next generation iPad, we could have the same size bezel that's just about as thick as the 10.5-inch bezels all the way around, which means, yes, if we're ditching Touch ID, there's no home button anymore, we could implement the home bar that we see on the iPhone X onto the iPad as well. I think this process would go very seamless because iPads can be used in any orientation, even upside down if you want to. And also the iPad already has a lot of 5-finger gestures, so you can go to the home screen with all 5 fingers or go to multitasking with 4. So adding support for a home bar where you swipe up to go home or swipe up and hold to activate multitasking wouldn't be that difficult. And I think a lot of people who are using the iPhone X by the time this next gen iPad comes out will be pretty used to that concept. They'll be okay with not having a home button. They'll be pretty used to swiping up from the bottom in order to go home. The other thing I think that would make the notch unnecessary on an iPad is the fact that an iPhone X needs to store the earpiece, the front-facing stereo speaker, within that notch, and an iPad does not. An iPad has 4 stereo speakers on the bumpers themselves, which would mean that the sensors for Face ID would not even take up as wide a space as the iPhone X does, because that one has a motion sensor as well as that front-facing speaker, which the iPad would not need. The iPad would need those proximity sensors that the iPhone X also has, but they could take up a lot less space, and I think it would be very easy to embed them in this side bezel because it is not as incredibly thin as the iPhone X's bezels, so a notch would not be necessary. You could have a clean look, and of course even bring curved corners to the 2018 iPad so that everything feels more natural. It matches the 10 very closely, while still incorporating Face ID, and an added bonus with Face ID would be able to have portrait mode on an iPad, at least on the front-facing camera. But then we start getting into what I think should be on the back. Sorry, yes, I did also do some conceptual art for this one. You guessed it, I think we should start adding a glass back to the iPad lineup. A lot of people are understandably against this because of fingerprints or because of the way they like a clean aluminum design, but I think it would match the iPhone lineup more closely if they matched that glass back, and I also imagining a glass back iPad could see it working out pretty well. First of all, this could allow for wireless charging on a tablet, which would be very, very tricky, and I think this is when Apple would have to start making wireless charging technology that is exclusive to them and not necessarily supporting the Qi standard. I don't think Qi wireless chargers would be capable of charging the iPad because iPads need 10 to 12 watt charge bricks in order to hold a charge, and a lot of Qi chargers don't necessarily support fast charging. Not to mention the charge pads themselves would be very, very small, especially on 10.5-inch or 12.9-inch iPads. So this means that perhaps AirPower single-handedly could charge your iPad very effectively. That's a larger charge mat, and that will give off a lot larger of a charge. But as I've mentioned earlier, with the future of wireless charging, we could see more advanced wireless chargers innovated from Apple, you know, bigger ones that can support many different charge things at once. So perhaps we could get AirPower 2 or AirPower XL that allows you to put your iPad, phone, watch, and AirPods on the same mat, and from there work our way up to perhaps one day having wireless charging on MacBooks, which would be very, very difficult, and the technology to do that is probably not available yet. But I think the iPad could be our first step in that direction because it's a bigger device, it requires more power to charge, so charge mats themselves would have to be a little bit larger to support the iPad size. And keep in mind the smart connector on iPads is still in the side bumper, so switching to glass back wouldn't prohibit you from using your same old smart connector accessories. And of course, a lot of us are Apple sheep. We love our Apple ecosystem, right? Doesn't it kind of bother a lot of people that their iPhones have glass backs and their iPads have aluminum? I would kind of love to see them match each other, both with the same shades of glass. And not to mention, like, the Galaxy Tab S3 already has a glass back. It does not have wireless charging, so they just did it because they could, and not a lot of people buy the Galaxy Tab products, but I still think that the Samsung Galaxy Tab S3 looks like a pretty nice tablet to have that glass on the back. It's kind of pointless because it doesn't allow it to do anything, but I think Apple has a chance to do it right, and I think the different color options we could see done with a glass-backed iPad would look pretty impressive. Now, last year I said that the new generation of iPads should have a dual camera, but I know that Apple is likely looking at this and saying, we want our cameras to be good, but at the same time, the percentage of people who use their iPad for photography is much lower than that of an iPhone, so they don't feel too much of a priority for the cameras to be good. But I think that's a shame. I really think there are a lot of benefits for tablet photography. Being able to view your pictures and videos at a much higher resolution, and with a larger device, you can be more precise and stable with how you film and stuff. But it's just kind of a socially awkward thing that a lot of people say, you know, you don't take pictures with iPads, it looks awkward. So that's why I put a single camera setup on the back of this one. I don't think they would add a dual camera to an iPad just because not enough people would take advantage of that. But the fact that you'd want Face ID on the iPad means that the front-facing camera at least could have portrait mode, which would be neat. And I think that with the Pixel lineup now showing that you can do portrait mode features without a dual camera, probably right now is making Apple think hard about designing single cameras in the future that using software and AI can make portrait mode looking products. So perhaps they won't update old phones to have portrait mode, but maybe in the 2018 iPad, the rear-facing camera using software and machine learning can take portrait mode style shots. And you know, they're not going to enable that on older devices because that would be too convenient and easy. But perhaps in the future they could enable things like that so you could take beautiful portrait mode photos on your iPad as well. Also, while we're talking about it, like, please ditch the headphone jack. You ditched it on the iPhone, keeping it on the iPad makes no sense, so just remove it, please. And I probably would be okay with them sticking with Lightning another year. I know a lot of people like USB-C, but I think my point to the fact that iPhones are going portless very, very soon, and that's why they're not switching to USB-C, can also carry over to iPads. I know they want to be productive, but Apple is really pushing a future that is wireless and portless, and I think that installing USB-C on the iPad would just kind of frustrate a lot of people who already have these Lightning cables. Once you have an iPad with wireless charging, you're that much closer to doing the portless challenge with your tablet as well, which I would really look forward to. But this would also create a problem with the Apple Pencil. You may have to design a new one that has a button or a switch on it that allows it to pair maybe with the W1 chip instead of plugging it in. But honestly, I would rather take that than what they do now. Plugging your Apple Pencil into the Lightning port on your iPad is still very fragile and unnecessary, and to charge it that way is kind of, or maybe next year they can figure out wireless charging in an Apple Pencil. I don't know, that would be tricky. You kind of need these ring-shaped discs inside your devices if you want them to support wireless charging. That would be difficult with such a device that's like a cylinder, so that's when you get into the hazy era. I'm not saying they should ditch all ports next year, but I'm saying switching to USB-C would automatically disable all iPad users from being able to use their old Apple Pencils, so don't do that. And also, all of our old chargers and Lightning cables we already have wouldn't work, so Lightning's the last port on the iPhone. I think it should stay the last port on the next-gen iPad. Of course, there would also be processor and RAM enhancements. You could see 6 gigs of RAM potentially potentially, and of course the A12X chip, which will be even faster, perhaps even faster than certain MacBooks. So again, software is important, gotta enable apps that take advantage of those processing speeds, but I think this would be a very noticeable and most exciting iPad upgrade we've gotten in a long time. And 2018 is a great time to do it because 2017 finally showed a year-over-year increase in iPad sales. So Apple, hit the market with a really cool refresh now because people are excited for it. I would definitely love to see a lot of these features that we're seeing on the iPhone 8 and 10 brought onto the bigger screen. Let me know all your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.